Good evening. Good evening. Hey, we made it. We made it, right, everybody? Yes. My name is Maria Fernanda. I'm so glad to be here. And we're just going to get right into it, right? Yours. Who buries bocaditos in their bedroom at 3 in the morning? Hibaro after hibaro, their corners and curves. She tastes Miami and it breathes. She tastes its breeze, then increases the plastic canopies crackling and mimicking almond tree leaves in the fall. When she rewraps, cada marroyo half eaten, guayaba intact, dulce de coco for Sunday, y pilones resembling cocoons of her childhood, rolling about her palm of her memory as she sings on Hostos campus, from which she prints sheets of music and stretches canvases on wood to bring home, making more hiding places for her candies, which arrived home with me that evening in a United States postal package a month after Hurricane Maria. The cardboard box echoing a church pew songbook in its size, but with edges kissing between the extra tape to hold long past the weeks of rising and landing helicopters. And maybe boats, run by hands of postal carriers, softening down La Calle Bruce Belvis before finally returning to work that mid-October in San Sebastian, where her father drove hours to deliver his mail because he craved the wind. Castanier, Puerto Rico. I read the town's name scribbled in a thinning ink on the corner of this box, jumping from the jaw of the narrow-ass dented mailbox in the lobby of our New York apartments, in front of which I make a wish to reserve even this first joy for her, my new roommate, Brisa. I carry her box, eyes closed to our front door, where Brisa's giggles soar about. Her every bitch, yes, sharpens the creases of her smile every time she lists chemicals being injected into our grocery store peanuts, tells me the remedies for sleeping and the ways to befriend this Leo, because you know Leos, we don't be befriending everybody, but this is the first time Lisa and I laugh and we hit the floor dancing and swinging our flower cotton skirts, hitting the wind its backbone. We sang the Scelia's Bema Colora, to which Lisa cued me in like we've been sisters years ago. And the sun always joins by lending itself to our kitchen. When Lisa opens the package to a limited edition of Hortazas Hopscotch, a torn news clipping of Primera Ahora, centering its words around a photograph del Yunque, gleaming before, and now looking like an image in a faded textbook. How it reminds Lisa of her father, a generous man who would take the shirt off his back for anyone and talk to her on the phone all night about how the people are organizing a little bit more every day, and how the government is helping him now more than ever, which Lisa knows is not the truth. He will not hit that danger because he wants her to know that he's okay, and that she needs to stay in New York to equal her guitar playing to her singing, and to remember that these sweets will always be how he reminds his Lisa of home, the same way that candies remind him of Lisa, and this is how she buries, this is why she buries Los Jibaros all over her room like acorns as a means to keep her memory fresh. Thank you so much. Thank you guys. That poem means so much to me. For those who may not know, Hurricane Maria happened September 2017, and I got her home roommate just a month before, and she hadn't heard from her father. So I wanted to write that to her to let her know, even though we might not know each other really well, even though we're from different países, there's solidarity in that, right? I'm going to read a poem that maybe you have received from the lovely Camilo, from the lovely Antonio. Shout out to Gala, by the way, for having us all here tonight. So you might have received a poem. It is actually a form that I'm playing with. It's called, it's by this poet, she's Pakistani American, her name is Sara Hazel Ali. And it's a family tree, so maybe for some of us it was really familiar. And with family trees, sometimes they have holes in them, right? Sometimes they have names, sometimes they have beginnings and ends we don't recognize. And so if you want to read along, the poem can be read horizontally as well as vertically. So I'm going to read slow so you can join in with me. All right, mycelium. The old people say that you have to send the young ones on a journey to form themselves, to learn practical things, to manage a canoe, sail, learn the waves, the trees, distinguish good land from bad. This is from Juan Garcia Salazar, who actually did research about palenques, which are free black communities in Ecuador, not just in Esmeraldas. And so this poem is for them. I weave, I fly, my thoughts through into my braids crisscross the southern, clearing the destinadas howl over the roads, the river, 44 lines, ripples, hemisphere, quatrains, currents, where palenques bloom for miles, a hum, an opening stanza of the railroads. I learned they change the color of the water. The first railroad we built night into day, sweat and calluses, shaping, healing our palms. Bajans, Jamaicans, Puerto Ricans, Esmeraldans, moonlight cassette tapes of collecting our scissions, our trees, our waves, our lands, forming our bamboo tubes, small bones, orange leaves, tobacco leaves, palm wood for our marimba. Left is our language, outgrowing what we know. Stories embrace tempo and returning to the decima, tenor of even this fabric, woven by hand. La decinera, our history. Now I'll read this vertically on the left side. I weave my thoughts into my braids. La Destinadas, where I learn night into moonlight. Cassette tapes of our bamboo tubes, small bones, orange leaves, tobacco leaves outgrowing even this fabric. I'll read the child of my thoughts crisscross the line, if you're with it, still with me. I weave my thoughts crisscross the river, bloom, they change. The color of sweat and calluses, our scissions, our trees, palm wood, stories woven by hand. And lastly, because y'all know I could go on with this one, but I will read it vertically on the right side. I fly through the southern hemisphere, an opening stanza of weave. Asians, Jamaicans, Puerto Ricans, Esmeraldans. Our waves, our land forming is our language. The decima, tenor of our history. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to this evening.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. So I was told to come down here after these beautiful words from Maria Fernanda. Let's give her a round of applause. And I have to introduce myself. My name is Eduardo Perdomo. I am the director of Mayor Muriel Bowser's Office on Latino Affairs, and I have the privilege to be the first self-identified Afro-Latino that ever led the office in 48 years of existence. And this is a testament of the inclusionary hiring policies and promotion. I started to work at the Mayor's Office on Latino Affairs, I believe it was almost 8 years ago. In April, will be 8 years ago. And I started as a grants manager. And never thought I was going to be leading one of the most, I think it's the most important institution within DC government to serve the Latino community. And for me, serving my neighbors, it's a wonderful privilege that I will always be grateful for, going through this amazing experience, to be here with you, for instance, tonight, to be able to support these kind of events, to be able to promote the Afro-Latinidad, and to help little by little to construct a society that is more welcoming, not only for a few, but for all of us. And some of the things that we've been able to do with the Afro-Latino Institute in the last couple of years. And I want to please give a round of applause to Antonio Montes. Tony, when he's organizing this kind of events, you see him serious and, very, very into the role of production role. But thank you for putting this event together. Also, my querido amigo Celestino Barrera, que anda con su chacabana de invierno. Celestino. Muchísimas gracias, Roland, por supuesto, Rolando. Muchísimas gracias a los panelistas, a todos. Thank you very much for being here. I know that you came from a long way, and being here with us, it means a lot. It means a lot because we're helping to spread the word of identities that are constructed in a different way, even more when we're here in the United States. Because I was talking just a few moments ago. I myself, once I'm here, I'm Afro-Latino, right? But when I'm back in Dominican Republic, I'm just Dominican. And I'm maybe black Dominican, or maybe un indiecito, right? Porque hay matices de colores, ¿no? And the beauty of these identities is that we construct this as we go through our experiences that are not necessarily interconnected, but not necessarily common, but they're common traits that we share. And that's very important to keep in mind, that there's not such a thing as a common experience, not only for women, for men, for no one. We all have different paths. We all have different tracks, but there are things, system in place that sometimes not necessarily work in our favors, right? So, but the things that we've been doing with the Afro-Latino Institute under Mayor Muriel Bowser's administration, who herself is a black lady, a black woman, that is the first woman to lead Mayor City 3 terms. So she's making history, but not only making history for the sake of achieving these kind of things. It's for the policy making that we incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion in every policy decision that we have here in the District of Columbia. And that's why we have been able to do some of the elements, part of the discussion points today that you guys are going to be talking about. For instance, we help with the process of the identity and intersection, blackness and Libertad. We organize, and I saw him a few minutes ago, he's there standing already. So Ivan Navas, who is part of, let's give him a round of applause. Ivan Navas. So Ivan Navas was part of a series of panel discussions that we hosted in Southeast in Washington, D.C., talking about the intersectionality of Black Washingtonians and Afro-Latinos through the lenses of something as beautiful as the music, specifically go-go music. So Ivan, como maestro, was able to, in a very didactic way, to share his thoughts and his mastering, right? De todo lo que significa la salsa y su intersección con el go-go. So it was a beautiful event. Thank you once again, Ivan, for that. And also, we've been able to amplify voices of individuals from the Afro-Latino communities in Washington, D.C. For 3 years in a row, we were able to highlight in total, more than 100 profiles of individuals from the Afro-Latino communities, and to let people know who we are, that we're not only one thing, that we're a diverse group of people, we're a diverse background and a diverse dreams. So we're looking for different things. And I see here my conciudadana Carmen, muchísimas gracias por estar aquí. She's a wonderful, wonderful Afro-Latina that has done so many different things here for los Latinos, but specifically en el campo de las artes y las humanidades. So muchísimas gracias a Carmen por todo lo que has hecho aquí en Washington. One of the things that we've been able to do, and I heard here this it's some pushback from people sometimes about having this approach. It's like, I believe that a soft way to engage with people that are different than us is through un plato de comida puede ser también. Pero it's through culture, right? It's culture that brings people together, and sometimes it tears them apart. But if we use culture as a vehicle for bringing people together, it's an easy way to engage with the others. And we did this through the Afro-Latino Festival, DC Afro-Latino Festival in Washington, D.C. It was hosted for the first time ever in 2021, and now we're going through this year, the third edition of the Afro-Latino Festival in Washington, D.C. It was a beautiful opportunity to showcase our diverse background, but to take it out from the circles of experts or people that are affected by the issues that we're all going through. And the coverage that we received through this festival was so unexpected to me. I was not expecting the level of coverage that we had in the media. And it was very gratifying because at the end of the day, other circles started to talk about Afro-Latinos. And now, that's why it's so important to have this kind of conversation. And I asked Celestino and Tony to share some of these clips today so we can share it through our social media and let people know about qué es eso de Afro-Latino, con qué se come eso, quiénes somos, de dónde venimos, hacia dónde vamos, tenemos cosas en común o no. Ese tipo de cosas son las que me llenan de orgullo, el poder ser afrolatino y el poder compartir no solo con los afrolatinos, pero tratar de llevar la afrolatinidad y la diversidad de todos nosotros a lo más alto de aquí de la ciudad de Washington DC. Así que sean todos bienvenidos y que disfruten la noche. Estamos muy contentos nuevamente por tenerlos a ustedes acá. Así que sepan que la Oficina de Asuntos Latinos de la Alcaldesa Muriel Bowser está abierta para todos. Si alguno de ustedes no conoce la oficina, estamos hasta quizás el año que viene, en la 2000 de la calle 14, y allí le podemos ayudar con cualquier cosa. Y lo importante de la oficina es que se ha convertido en esta administración en un vehículo de soporte para todas las comunidades y un vehículo para mejorar la calidad de vida de la gente. Una agencia pequeñita que hace cosas grandes. Muchísimas gracias.
Saludos. Yo soy Omarito Martinez. Omarito Martinez. I work at the National Trust for Historic Preservation, where I help run 28 historic sites across the country. I'm also the board president for the Association of African American Museums, but I was born right here in DC. Yo soy boricua para que lo sepa. I wanted to, before I go on to remarks, make sure that we acknowledge the ambassador of Nicaragua. May you please stand so we can acknowledge him. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. Again, I was born in DC, raised in Maryland, and what I always tell people is that the four walls of the home that my mother and father built for my sister and I, eso fue Puerto Rico, right? Arroz con habichuela, salsa y merengue, right? But when I stepped outside that corridor, that threshold, it became Chocolate City, right? Silver Spring, downtown Silver Spring, where we were raised in Washington, D.C. So, my parents came over here in the 60s. My father worked for NASA, got a Space Flight Center, one of the first Puerto Ricans to work for NASA when it was a very young agency. My mother came after already teaching 7 years in Santurce and taught 34 years in Oyster bilingual, now known as Oyster Island, right? So we have a lot of history with this town around Afro-Latinidad and Puerto Ricanness for sure. And so if anybody went to Oyster from 68 to 2002, my mother was probably the teacher. Okay. She's right here, raise your hand, Mama. I want to give big thanks for the poet Maria Fernanda. You spoke to me in all the words that you said. but especially to call out for Juan Garcia Salazar. As a museum person, I have to acknowledge that he was the person who gave the first object to the National Museum of African American History and Culture. It was a wooden boat seat that had a Nancy on it. So everybody knows about the African story around the Nancy. It's a great analogy because the Nancy, as a spider, obviously weaves spider webs. But that story connects to diaspora so wonderfully. I'm sure there's a different version of Nancy depending on what part of the diaspora you're speaking of. Definitely big shout out to Eduardo Perdomo making history up in here. I mean, first black Latino, that's amazing. And I also want to acknowledge Abel Lopez. He's been doing this for a long time. He's the associate producer here at the Gala Theater. And of course, I have a special acknowledgement for mi primo querido, Rolando Roba. If you don't know who he is, just tap the person next to you, and then he or she probably has 2 or 3 stories for you, right? So I want to acknowledge him. I want to acknowledge Celestino and Tony from Afro Latino Institute for really welcoming the Absolutamente Negro group here. And we are doing this Practice of Freedom conversation series in DC. We had our first one that was virtual in New York, and we're going to go around the country and continue to bring up these important conversations around Afro-Latinidad. I have to take a moment to acknowledge the Queen, Dr. Vega. Listen, institution builder. I mean, if you don't have it, if it doesn't fit, she's going to pave a way and make it, right? Caribbean Cultural Center, African Diaspora Institute. Creative Justice Initiative. Co-founder of Corredor Afro in Puerto Rico. I mean, come on. We stand on black women's shoulders all day, so let's not act brand new about it now. Right? And of course, just again, a special shout out to my mother who raised me. Love you, mommy. Thank you for my sister being here, and I think my wife and kids are on their way as well. I want to get into why we're here. So this began with an idea, a vision, and deep conversations from Afro-Latino historians and cultural advocates dedicated to celebrating and safeguarding our rich legacy as an essential part of the African diaspora. Concurrently, we observed unsettling events in 2022. Pervasive racial incidents spanning from West Coast to East Coast, and even reaching Caribbean nations and territories. And one of the things that I really like about the group that Dr. Vega and Josue put together is that we really intentionally created spaces to disrupt this idea that Afro-Latinos only exist in one part of our country. We know that we're everywhere, and that's important for me to call out. These events included in 2022 attempts to erase our history, prohibit our expressions, our words, enact laws displacing our communities, and intentionally instigate cultural wars to foster division and dominance. Colonialism is real, and this division is a vestige of that. From Puerto Rico, where an Afro-Boricua family faced constant racist harassment due to their skin tone, to other parts of the nation, we witnessed similar racially motivated actions and biased legislations that limited our human and women's rights. Well, a lot of us were motivated by these things, including Dr. Vega and Josue, who really wanted to put together this idea of having these in-depth conversations and having a diverse, multi-generational group of scholars, cultural advocates, and communicators, which is the group I'm part of. It's the advisory board for Absolutamente Negro. Let's give it up for Absolutamente Negro. Out of these exchanges, a nationwide collaboration among the Afro-Latino, Latina, Latinx, and Latinx community blossomed. This joint effort engaged the Creative Justice Initiative, the Afro-Latino Forum, and our advisory board. Armed with the wisdom imparted by our peers and communities, we've curated and disseminated a cultural educational series. Our profound aspiration is to nurture solidarity, unity, and mutual understanding within the Afro-Latino, Afro-Latina, Latinx, and Latinx community, and the broader African diaspora, aiming to shape a brighter, inclusive, and equitable future for the upcoming generations. I want to welcome the audience to this space. Bienvenidos. I want to also welcome and acknowledge that at the end we're going to have another great poet, Angela C. Gibb, who will be performing for you at the closing. And let me tell you something. This sister's fierce. I remember first seeing her on the Negro docuseries with Dash Harris. That is, if you haven't seen it, go look for it on YouTube. It's an excellent docuseries. But I also want to say that I think we need to vote for a poet to be president. I think we'd have a much different country. I'm just saying, I love poets, so that's my pitch. So please welcome the panelists. I'm going to bring up the moderator, Jose Calderon, who's the president of the Hispanic Federation, which is the nation's premier Latino nonprofit membership organization. He will come forward and introduce the panelists to you and really start this engaging conversation. Muchísimas gracias.
Buenas tardes. So I'm going to ask the panelists to join me on stage. If you can, and we'll introduce them once they get up here. Let me give you a hand here. So yeah, super excited to be here. Buenas tardes, good afternoon. Thank you so much for making time, afternoon, you can be doing so many things to join us today. It's nice to see so many friendly faces in the audience. Again, Jose Calderon, I am privileged to be moderating this amazing group of panelists, which I'm going to introduce super quickly, right? Just their title. If we read their bios, we'd be here for another 2 hours just on their bios. But to my immediate left here is Kayla Kaysen, who is the former vice president and co-president of Chango, the Afro-Latine Student Association and Spanish-Speaking Society at Howard University. To Kayla's immediate left is, well, I think he's been introduced like 4 or 5 times already, Roland Raubach, president of Afro-Latino Institute. Give it up for Roland. And Dr. Marta Moreno, I'm reading everything, sorry. Dr. Anita Gonzalez, co-founding lead of the Racial Justice Institute of Georgetown University and professor of Performing Arts and Global Black Studies, Dr. Anita Gonzalez. Give it up for So as I said, I am super excited about this conversation because it's a conversation we certainly don't have nearly enough. We really don't, right? When we talk about sort of Afro-Latinidad and what that means, it is essential reality and issue to understanding who we are as a people, to understanding our history, to understanding where we're going, to understanding, again, the complexities within our realities, our lived realities. And it's essential in terms of the world that we want to create, understanding that reality. Because the fact is that, just in raw numbers, the fact is that by some estimates, nearly 90% of the people, of Africans that were enslaved, that were brought here to the Americas, went to Latin America and the Caribbean, right? Nearly 90% by some estimates, right? That number ranges from 70 to 90%, but obviously the vast majority went to Latin America and the Caribbean. And the fact is that today, by some estimates, approximately 250 million Afro-descendants live in Latin America. We need to have a conversation centered on Blackness. We need to have a conversation centered on that reality, which is inescapable. Inescapable. And if we are going to advance social justice, that has to be centered on who we are, on our identity, on our true identity, which in many ways has been denied to us, right? There's been a systemic miseducation throughout Latin America, and certainly we know that it exists here in the United States. But if we are going to deal with a power structure here in this country, and a movement that wishes to subjugate, denigrate, marginalize, disenfranchise us, and even in some cases erase who we are, it has to be from that center, right, of Blackness, of who we truly are as a people. I always feel that so many of us that are involved around the struggle for civil rights, the struggle for social justice, when we talk about it from the Latino space, the Latinx space, oftentimes we miss this important subject, that this subject needs to be centered in everything that we're talking about, identity. I'm so proud, by the way, of Eduardo, right, and Omar, right, for centering that, again, who we are, identity, as part of what they do day to day, right? We can't move forward, right? And in fact, we have been stuck in many ways because we have not centered that reality in our conversation. So again, as I said, super excited that you are going to be treated to amazing conversations today about identity and lived experience, right, of what it means to be Latinas, to be Afro-Latina, to be an Afro-Latino. By the way, it's hard because, you know, all these names for us at this point, right, it's like, and Afro-Latina is sort of what we're sort of going with here at the present time. That may currently change. But again, you know, I'm going to be, for the most part, be very quiet and allow you to have unfettered access to this amazing group of panelists. And actually wanted to say that, you know, when I was growing up, and we had very little images, right, positive images of our identity, right? We didn't even have, really, for the most part, Latina history of any kind, let alone a history focused on Afro-Latinidad, right? But what I do remember when I was young is that we did have a reporter, his name was Pablo Guzman. He recently passed away. Yes. And when I remember, like, growing up in New York, right, and seeing a Latino on television, in this case an Afro-Latino on television, the incredible sense of pride that I had. I didn't know at the time, I was relatively young, that he was one of the co-founders of the Young Lords, right? Which was a movement, an organization, a party that was created to mirror the Black Panther Party, right? And it was a movement around liberation, around Puerto Rican independence, around community empowerment. And Pablo was one of the leaders of that movement, right? And he eventually became a journalist. But also Pablo had adopted the name Yoruba as his sort of middle name, right? To really, again, you know, lift up his Africanness, to lift up his centering sort of Blackness in his experience. And to me, in going back and sort of reading after he passed away, some of his, you know, some of the things that he had written. One of the things that he actually mentioned was that for him, you know, that he saw many light-skinned Puerto Ricans unable to identify with the Black struggles that he was seeing in New York City, but him as you know, self-described Black Puerto Rican, like that, he was part of that struggle. That struggle was his, as much as the struggle for Puerto Rican, you know, empowerment was his as well too. And he got that instinctively because he said, and I gotta repeat exactly what he said, but he said, you know, before they called me the S word, they called me the N word, right? And every time that he stepped outside, that's how people saw me. And so we often talk about, again, that duality, right, of being an Afro-Latina, Latino, Latine, and living that sort of experience, right, of, again, being part of both groups, right, but not fully embraced by both groups. So I really want to sort of open the stage, right, for the panelists, and this is for all three panelists, to talk about that lived experience of that duality, and again, that sense of not fully being embraced in, you know, sort of, we can put it in both groups or both camps. So why don't we start with Anita?
Hello, thank you for being here. I was thinking King, when you talked about identity, the first thing I want to talk about is invisibility. Because I've worked so much in working with Afro-Mexican populations, and until you're visible, you can't have resources, you can't have funding, you can't articulate who or what you are. I think I'm going to open with, and there's so many examples, but I'm going to open with an easy one. I, as you know, work for the Racial Justice Institute at Georgetown University. And this institute was supposed to be founded to give a kind of reparations for the 272 enslaved people in Maryland. So they reached out across the whole country and they found 4 scholars and they brought them to campus. And when we all sat together at Georgetown for the first time, we were like, so where are you from? We're like, Puerto Rico. And where are you from? You're like, Trinidad. It's like they didn't even realize that in their desire to hire African Americans, they were hiring Afro-Latinos because they never even heard of it. And so this is a question of who are we and why are we invisible, that they could not even see that difference. And that's like the groundwork from which we're moving forward. And I'm going to let Roland talk next because we were sharing a story about my father's experience growing up. He's the Cubano, and growing up in Florida. And when I would say to him, Daddy, why don't you talk about being Cubano? And he'd say, let me tell you, they have a little song. They may call you Hawaiian and you may play the ukulele, but when you go outside the door, you're just a plain to me.
For me, the issue of identity is very, very crucial. Growing up in Puerto Rico, my racial awareness was 0, meaning that I did not have a clear concept of my blackness within my own barrio. But as I grew up and moved in different circles, I began to see that there was scientifically based segregation. I did not see blacks or Afro-Puerto Ricans in banks, in important institutions, and there was a fear of discussing race within that community. It's only after I leave Puerto Rico and go to the Air Force that I began to develop a black consciousness. And I blame the educational system in Puerto Rico that tends to deny or suffocate the aspirations of Afro-Puerto Ricans in the island. But I must also include that we cannot assume that all light-skinned Puerto Ricans are racist, because in my neighborhood, I was accepted in different circles that were housed by white Puerto Ricans. So we need to be very careful with respect to how we label certain individuals and their commitment to mitigate the evilness of racism. Now, my presence here in Washington, D.C. was very critical in understanding that there were Afro-Latinos throughout Central and South America, because I was not aware. You see, and the folk that are creating this scientific-based distance among groups have done a tremendous job. They have used the educational system to divide, to confuse, and to deny our rightful presence in the Hispanic experience. And this is a calculated effort. And it's manifested not only in the Caribbean, but also in throughout South America. Because my position is that all Spanish-speaking countries are racist. That's my position. Now, there are various degrees depending on the number of Afro-Latinos in those countries, but I challenge and I ask members of the white Hispanic community to become more conscious with respect to the plight that we are facing and join us in trying to mitigate that evil, cancerous racism that is really choking us.
That's kind of heavy to follow up on. Very, very true, very, very honest. I'm going to share a little bit about my experiences growing up in Washington Heights, or at least Inwood, New York City. So if you don't know that neighborhood or that community is predominantly Dominican, predominantly Puerto Rican, Mexican, Hispanic kids. So when I was going to elementary school, you know, kids talk, whatever, we're having discussions at the cafeteria table, and we get into this conversation about music, and we're talking about hip hop and R&B. And I remember, I don't know how we got here, but I remember saying to one of my friends, "Oh, you know you're black, right?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm not black. Like, no, I'm not black." And mind you, he's very much darker than me, so I'm looking at him, he's looking at me. I'm confused because in my head, you are black. Yes, you speak Spanish. Yes, your parents are Dominican, but you look like my father. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, now I'm confused. So once, and that conversation happened maybe like third grade. So now I'm going through life kind of confused between the difference of blackness and Latinidad. The whole time, there's no real difference. It's all one and the same because we all come from these same people. So when I'm learning more about identity, I'm learning more about my own identity, it's becoming more of a conversation of, is there a difference or not? Where is this line? How do I identify myself, and how do people understand the identity that I am offering to them, if that makes sense? So when I start to apply for schools and I start to think about where I want to go for college, I think more subconsciously I realized that I want to go to a place where I can further educate myself on my own identity. Because again, there's still this division in my head: am I black and Latino, or am I just black? Am I Afro-Latino? Who am I for real? So I think coming to a place like Howard University, coming to a space where I can learn a little bit more, educate myself a little bit more about what this identity looks like to other people, has helped me identify with myself more. So now, fast forward 4 years later, or 3.5 years later, I'm finished with school, and I can say, oh, I am Afro-Latino, because there's no real division between the two. You know what I'm saying? So as we talk about education, as we talk about the way we socialize with one another, it's also important that we understand how we express our own identities, because it influences the way people express themselves. So, you know, it's bigger than just the people who are teaching us about history, but how we teach each other about each other as well.
So this is heavy, right? Like, this is heavy, and again, these are conversations. I love, by the way, the stage, right? It's like, you know, you're at home, but these are the conversations that we need to be having at the kitchen table, right? We need to be having in every single kind of forum imaginable, and by and large, they don't happen, right? I mean, I certainly, growing up within sort of the Dominican context, like, you know, again, you know, completely shied away from that, right? And we had, you know, uninterrupted miseducation, right? First of all, just to be a colonized people, right? All of us that have lived under colonization, right, or the effects of colonization, we have all been miseducated, right? In the case of the Dominican Republic, there's been extreme miseducation, right, for certain political reasons. And so, you know, to me, getting here to the United States was the first opportunity that I had to sort of explore, you know, the concept of identity and sort of who we are as people and where do we come from. And, you know, again, what are we Platanos, right? And, you know, and those things, right? And again, the historical standpoint, and, you know, the great Colombian writer, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, shed light on the fact that Latin America is a place where magical realism is alive, right? He shed light on the fact that, again, the lines of reality and fantasy are blurred, right? He sort of shed light on the fact that a myth often becomes fact. And I think in some ways it's apropos because the myth of Latin America being this place of racial harmony, of having racial equality, was something that we very much lived under, right? I mean, Roland spoke to that reality. I think many of us, right, were educated in systems that we were all equal, right? It didn't matter if you were white Puerto Rican or, right, or white, light-skinned Puerto Rican or black, darker-skinned Puerto Rican, you were equal, right? And we know that that is not the case. It's not true, right? The same applies to anywhere throughout Latin America. But that myth, right, was very real. And I think many of us brought that here to the United States, right? And when we saw the divisions here in the United States, we said, oh, this is a uniquely U.S. problem. Where it's not a uniquely U.S. problem, right? That in fact, this is an issue that cuts across all of the Americas, right? And is deeply ingrained in very much sort of this colonial white supremacy system, right? It's predicated on that. In fact, talk to us a little bit more about what we need to do, right? And I think all of us need to do to combat this historical and systemic miseducation of our people. What do we need to do? And I know that's going to touch on a multitude of issues around education, representation. You mentioned Anita, right? Again, being present, coalition building, institution development, leadership development, et cetera, et cetera. But we really need to dive into that because it's not that the work started now, right? Dr. Marta Moreno Vega has been leading that effort for decades and decades. And there have been so many other voices that have been fighting that fight, right? So this is not new, but at this particular moment in time, what is it that we need to do better, right? To strengthen, right? To educate people, to educate our own people around sort of our Afro-Latino roots, right?
I think we need to have a lot more conversations like this. I was thinking, there were so many things I was thinking about, but I was thinking in particular about this play I wrote called Ybor City. And it's about divisions between blacks and whites. And it's set in 1918 Tampa. And it's about how blacks and whites came together with this sense of solidarity that you're talking about. And then when they came to the United States, the Jim Crow laws tore them apart. Because that is in a sense what happened with my father. He was a tabaquero, my grandfather, and he was unable to blend in. But what I wanted to talk about in terms of the conversations is I've done this piece in several different places in colleges, but we most recently did it in New York with the Latine Musical Theater Lab. And what was interesting about that is that they were able to get people who were really from New York, from the DR, from Puerto Rico, from Cuba, black ones and white ones together to read the script and talk about the conversation. And people flew in from all over because they haven't had the conversation. Because they wanted to sit in the room and through the mechanism of looking at this imaginary story or half imaginary story on paper, they were able to really talk about how it felt to be an Afro-Latino in Georgia, right? Because they came from all over, what it was like to be a kind of a white Latina who hadn't really thought too much about blackness from Puerto Rico. And I remember, I have a lot to say and I circle around again, but one of the things we talk about is culture. Like there's a way in which, yes, African culture is present in every single Latin American country, and we who are Black Latino may carry it with us, but it's also something by which people are labeled. Like we're not talking about black engineers from Puerto Rico, right? You know what I mean? It's a way in which, oh yes, they're so cultural, but they're not really like thinking, right? And that's another part of the picture. Because there was someone in the cast who was like, oh, they just love to dance so much. And I'm like, well, it's not exactly just that. We do a lot of things, right? We have doctors here. We have people going into a lot of areas. So it's a double-edged sword. We want to get the histories and the representations out. And we want to, yes, acknowledge all our beautiful cultural traditions that we bring with us, which are a lot about community building, right? But we also don't want them to be appropriated and made it seem as that's all we do.
We have to be very careful with this movement of suppressing black history that was initiated in Florida and now is spreading to other states. The reason why there is suppression of our history is to create a generation of folk that can feel good about themselves and deny their historical cruelty towards minorities, blacks, Latinos, etc. So the issue of education becomes extremely critical in transforming the mind of folk. I would like to see a panel of all white folk, I'll say about 5 or 6, so they can explain to us the joys, the benefits of exercising racism towards Afro-Latinos. I would love to do that. As a matter of fact, I will even volunteer to be the moderator of that panel. I don't want you to do it. I want to do it. And I will come up with the questions, etc. Because we're giving white people a pass. We're not becoming militant. We are becoming sort of soft in our approach. And I think that we need to be a little bit more forceful in our advocacy, in our educational approach, and be very militant in our litigation. When was the last time that a group of Afro-Latinos sued X company? We are too passive. We are like flan. You know flan? So my interest is not to be flanesque in my approach. My approach is based on militancy and exposing folk that are racist. A lot of people in DC are afraid when Roland Roebuck is holding a mic because they don't know what the hell I'm going to say. But historically, I have been very inflexible with my advocacy. And I'm hoping that others will embrace that posture in order to change the equation.
I'm sorry, Peter. We're going to switch this up next time, and you'll speak before Roland.
You know, people are surprised that I'm sitting here being very serious because that's not my perfil.
No, everything you said is very true. As provocative as it is, it's a fact. Because if you do not expose the truth of what's going on, the truth, like, the issues will still be the issues no matter how long you fight those issues if the root of the cause is not uprooted. And you have to talk to the people who cause those issues. And if they're not willing, they might be a little hesitant to speak, and that's okay. You know, you can't really force everybody, but you have to at least immerse those people into this conversation that we're having. Because yes, it's beautiful to have a room full of all of us, but everybody else needs to be in this room as well. So to have people who look like us, don't look like us, be immersed in our experiences and our culture and our foods and our concerns about the world and our lives, that is what's going to push forward our progress and have people who look like us but also who don't look like us fight for the issues that we all see around us, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
So, you know, everything that they've mentioned is so critically important, and I think about, of course, right, like, part of this work is about education, right? Being a leader means that you are to educate others, right? I mean, that's inherent in sort of that description, sort of that that term, right, of leadership, we have to do a better job of educating everyone. And that means our own people, but that means others as well too, right? And I think it is difficult when all systems are set up, right, to miseducate our communities, right? And in the broader sense, our communities, right, around our identity. And again, it's a historical, right, miseducation. And so I think part of the work, which I think Roland highlighted, right, is about, and I'd love to see that panel, by the way. We may have to sponsor that. Because I do think it's important, right, to educate people who haven't walked in your shoes, right? People who don't understand. I think, Kayla, we have an opportunity with our young people. Like, our young people are much more receptive. They've been, they're more worldly in that respect, right? I think, Roland, you mentioned you didn't know, right, that there were, black people throughout, the Americas, right, until you got here, right? I think, that there's a reason for that, right? I mean, we just weren't taught those things back home. And so I think now with so many movements that are afoot here, progressive movements, right, around liberation and around social justice, I think our young people, right, have a better opportunity to create a better world, or have an opportunity to create a better world, right, by sort of opening up their minds more really. But speaking of sort of, again, the creation of a better world, we're not in a good place, right? We're not in a good place nationally. In fact, as all of you know, we have national elections this year, right? And the fact is that we have other movements afoot, right, that wish to turn back the clock on everything that we have fought for. Certainly everything we have fought for probably since the founding of this republic. The whole notion of civil rights, right? They want to turn back the clock completely. Diversity and inclusion, right? Representation, and basically, the movements, right, which are all sort of joined around the premise of, again, reaffirming and reestablishing and cementing white supremacy as the law of the land, right? We know that that's very real. We know that that's very much tied into our national elections today. Knowing that, right, and understanding that, I kind of think about something that you were sharing with me, Anita, beforehand, about the need for us to be better at building coalitions, and particularly with the African American community, right? Being Afro-Latino means sort of having, sort of a foot in both places, which again, ni de aquí ni de allá, never fully being embraced. And when we think about sort of the Black experience, and certainly when we think about the African American community, we have a shared agenda, which is very clear. But the forces of division, the forces that have, in some ways, sort of programmed, and actually, Pablo Guzman talked about this, like, we have been programmed to stand apart, right? What do we have to do to break down those barriers, those walls that have existed between our people, right? People who, again, have been disenfranchised, have been historically marginalized, and share, right, almost an identical agenda when you sort of go down the line. When we talk about whether it's healthcare, education, we talk about economic empowerment, we talk about representation, et cetera, right? How do we do a better job at building something that will be sustainable, right? Because we have built a true coalition, right, that is really looking at the empowerment of all of our people. Let me start with Roland.
All right. In order to achieve, there is a difference between coalitions and coalition. Coalition is shocking, okay? If we look at a national level, who are our Afro-Latino leaders? If I ask each one of you, name 3 national Afro-Latino leaders. You'll have...
I have 3 right here.
Yeah. Beside us. You will have a hard time identifying those individuals. The point that I'm trying to make is that in order to set up the forum in which you're going to have this coalition building discussion, you need to have some legitimate leaders that can coalesce the folk in order to engage in the discussion. That's one. And number 2, where are you going to have that discussion? And what is the outcome? I mean, because we talk and we talk and we talk and we talk and more talk, but we do not come up with concrete action. If I ask again the members of the audience, give me the platform for the Afro-Latino Community 2024. Boop. Nada. Okay, so we have to be very conscious of folk that look like us, but have sold their soul in order to appease white folk, and they're doing a detrimental job in sabotaging our potentiality for coalitions. We are not shaming individuals that look like us but have a different agenda. We are nice. Somos buenos. Somos santitos. Y no damos macetazos donde tenemos que dar los macetazos. So, without having critical leaders that can coalesce, you're not going to have the opportunity to design an effective agenda for transformation. So young leaders need to be coached by us, los viejos, so they can do the work for the future.
Well, thank you, brother. Yeah, give it up for that. And I would say, for sure, I mean, this is why we're doing this work, right? And this is why Dr. Marta Moreno Vega, right, felt that this is so important to have these conversations, because it is very much around building an agenda for us, by us, right, with us, and bringing that forward, right, to everyone, right, to people outside of our community, certainly within the community. But that's why these conversations are so critically important, right? So the voices that we hear here today, the voices that are going to be in the audience that we're going to hear from in a few minutes, are critically important in developing that agenda, right? And I think, by the way, we would not have a hard time in this room coming up with an agenda, right? I think it's clear, sort of again, the fight that we have. So, Anita, I do want to focus in on this piece around the acceptance of the African American community.
Yeah, I was going to say, this coalition building has to happen with the African American community, but it's also an educational project. I mean, what he was saying before, where people are like, oh, you're just speaking that Mexican stuff, right? As if it's a separate experience from what it is to be a black person in the Americas. I mean, there is a unity, at least among the people in this room. We mostly live here, right? And when we go outside the door, people are like, oh, you black. And then when we approach the African American communities, let's call them the English-speaking communities, because I want us to think about how the colonial languages are the only thing dividing us, because the racism is the same, right? So we need to start having coalitions between the French-speaking blacks and the Spanish-speaking blacks and the English-speaking blacks. And I do so much work in the Caribbean, and you're all like one island away, you know what I mean? From the next person who speaks a different language, and there's a Creole language going on, but I don't think that each of the different lingual communities are actually reaching out to the others. Exactly. So the coalition building has to happen. I mean, we're all talking about blackness. You're talking about anti-racism. You're talking about racism in American society. When you were speaking about the current politics, I was thinking about the double bind, right? Like we have people at the border, and the ones they show you on TV are the ones who happen to be black, so that you can again layer on top of that the criminality that we assume of African Americans, so now they're immigrant criminals also at the border who happen to be black. But all of it is about this kind of white supremacy and colonial culture that's defining all of our lives. So in terms of the coalition building, we have to educate the other groups that it's only about a language difference, you know? And then, of course, there's cultural distinctions, but the coalitions, I mean, I wish there were more people from the African American community here. I'm so glad he's working in the mayor's office, right? She sees it. How many other people can we get to really recognize that we need more unity in order to create a coalition that can be politically activist?
So, Kayla, you know, obviously you so you get to Howard University, and there's this club that is basically defunct, right? It's called Tango, and it's focused on, you know, Afro-Latinidad, right? And you get there and you sort of say, well, I'm gonna thrust myself into reviving Tango. Tell us, you know, sort of again, why you did that, and then again, the experience of sort of lifting this up and making sure that within Howard University, a historically African-American college, that this was given, you know, weight, right? That it was given due respect, and that it was, you know, someplace that could be attractive to everyone and important for everyone to know sort of this experience.
So I remember sophomore year of college, because freshman year, COVID year, so that was all online, all at home. But when I finally get to campus, beginning of the year, we usually have this thing called a student org fair. So all student organizations will come out and they'll set up their little tables and they'll do their little intro. Here I am, this is what we do, come join our club. So I'm excited, I'm walking around, I see the African Student Association, I see the Caribbean Student Association, and I'm looking, and there's no Latino Student Association, which is crazy because I know I'm here, and I can't be the only Latino at this school, so where is our organization, where is our club? So I do a little research, and I see that there's an organization called Shango, but when I went to the org fair, there was no Shango table, so what's really going on? So let's keep that in our mind. So I am roommates with a woman who is now currently the president of the African Student Association. But when we were sophomores, that was like the first student organization she joined because she's African, so she's Senegalese and Congolese. So of course she went to find her community. So I'm home because, you know, I'm not necessarily African, so she's coming home, she's telling me about her stories. And she goes, Kayla, come to one of our events one day. They're gonna love you, they're gonna accept you, but the organization for everybody, just come. So I go and I see the way that they commune with each other, the way that they have a home to express everything that they know about their culture, their language, their music, the way they dance, the inside jokes, the just energy of being African in a predominantly African American school, or even if it's not predominantly African American, just a space where they can feel like they're at home, even when they're not at home. So I felt that space and I was like, wow, this is beautiful. There needs to be a space for my people because, again, I cannot be the only person of Latino descent at this university. That's ridiculous. So in the back of my head, I'm like, okay, I don't know when I can start this organization, but I'm gonna start it because I'm the type of person, I'm just gonna do it if I feel like doing it. Sorry, I don't know. But I remember starting to kind of scope around, trying to figure out how I can start an organization. And I see a post on Instagram for an event that Shango was having. I'm like, wow, okay, so they are kind of active, they're still here. This is spring semester. So I go to the event and there's only about 7 people in the room. And this is towards the end of spring semester, so this is when like student organizations are changing administrations and stuff like that. So as soon as I sit in that room, the first thing that pops into my head is how can I lead this organization? Because I know that I have things to say and I have things to do. Because there are experiences that I want to share, there are events I want to share. There's no salsa event. What's going on? Like, so I already have ideas about things that I want to bring to Howard University community that represents my community. So fast forward a couple months, election for the new administration comes, and I apply to be vice president, and I get the position, which is kind of crazy because I have never been vice president of anything. So why? That's like
Well, you are now.
Oh, so it's me and our former president O'Brien Rosario, who is a fantastic person. He should be up here with us as well. But he's the one who helped motivate me and help me build, or I guess rebuild the organization from what it was. Because when we got it, it was basically a name and an Instagram, and that's it. But there were no events, there was no community, there was no real culture, this Shango on this campus. So we get to my junior year, I guess, and we're hitting the ground running. That whole summer, we're sitting at meetings 5 hours straight over Zoom. I'm in California for an internship, he's in DC for an internship. We're working hard for what we know we're about to come into in the academic year. So we come in the academic year, we hit the ground running. We're at the org fair, we make sure our poster is right. I make sure my poster is right because, I love making a good poster. But I make sure it's loud, it's bright, people can see us, we have a speaker going on, we're here. And something that I said even before we got to that academic year is people are going to hear us. I remember saying that vividly. People will hear us and people will see us. So visibility was the biggest thing I wanted to kind of focus on that year. And throughout that entire year, we maybe put on something crazy, like 50 events or something like that. I know that we put on at least an event a week because visibility was entirely too important to me. People had to know that the African community was at Howard, and we were a part of the Black community that Howard is supposed to be serving. So we had to not only show that we were here, but show that we were worthy of the service that the university had been giving to all the rest of the diaspora. So that's kind of been the mission for the past year and a half. Something that I've been trying to implement in kind of my next group of leaders is to make sure that people continue to hear you, make sure that you are not only serving the Allied community, but serving the people at this university who are here to find a family, who are here to find a home. Play that salsa, listen to the wants, the needs, the concerns of our people, and make sure that we are not only enjoying this culture, but educating everyone else around us about this culture and collaborating, heavily collaborating with the other cultural organizations on this campus.
Oh, we're gonna jump into Q&A?
4 minutes.
Okay, all right, good. You gotta put that up on a sharp line.
I just have one question in response. I wonder, so this is at an HBCU, and it was that struggle to be recognized. What happens if it's at a Hispanic serving institution? Is it just as hard?
Yes.
And for different reasons?
Sure, and that's, again, that's the dichotomy, right? And that's the challenge, right, that we have, right? And so I'm gonna go to you, Roland, in a second, and I think we have like four minutes to sort of wrap up before Q&A. One of the things that we had a conversation before today's panel was around spirituality, right? And also we talk a lot about our institutions, right? Like, it's particularly the arts, right? And how important, how vital they are in educating our communities, right? And that in many ways, we have been losing our institutions, right? We have been losing our connection to spirituality in many ways. And as you know, clearly, right, with the ruling around affirmative action, they are, it's not just higher education, they are coming after our institutions, right? They're using, which is, sort of the height of hypocrisy, I know you probably use a choicer word, that they're using discrimination to say all discrimination is bad. And the way you don't discriminate is by not, focusing on any group, right? And so therefore, right, the Caribbean Cultural Center should not exist, right? Or this place here, this amazing theater, right, the Gala, shouldn't exist, right, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's the latest salvo, that's the latest attack. But to go back to sort of this point, right, where they're trying to undermine, right, the institutions that we have bled for and created, right, that have taken us decades to create. We have lost, in many ways, that connection, that spiritual connection to our roots, right, to Africa in so many ways. And I love the fact that you named Chango, and we talked about Pablo with Yoruba, and the importance of sort of reconnecting in that way in order to be able to move forward. So Roland, please speak to that.
As president of the Afro-Latino Institute, we had a conversation related to collaborating with Changos. So that's part of our work plan. Now, in reference to the destruction of, let's call them Afrocentric institutions, many of these folk look at us as we try to embrace our spirituality as being disloyal to this American concept. Meaning that we are not embracing America. We are embracing something else. We are embracing candomblé. We are embracing santeria. We are embracing our cultural institutions that charge our energy because they want to separate us from those institutions and spirituality that give us strength so we can be confused. Because if you continue to nurture all of this spirituality, if you continue to add value to these cultural institutions, we become strong. So they want us to become weak so we can be easily manipulated. And we cannot fall into that trap.
Give it up, right? That's so important. We have a lot of fights, but I can tell you now, I believe one of our biggest fights, unquestionably, is protecting our institutions. We have been, in spite of everything that we've had against us, we have been great at creating institutions. And I would say within the Latina experience, that is very clear. In the case of others, where we've created churches and stuff. In the Latino space, we've created community-based organizations, right, that have been leading the work around the advancement of social justice. And they continue to be critical for centering Blackness and centering who we are, our people, and centering empowerment in the struggle. So they're coming after it. We have to do everything within our means, right? As great Malcolm would say, right? Everything, right, possible, right, by any means necessary to protect these institutions. We're going to stop here, right? Because I think we want to certainly hear from this amazing audience. I know you're kind of chopping at the bit to get to these amazing panelists. So this is the time.
Any questions?
All right, back. Yep.
Phil Donahue's time.
Hi everybody, my name is Mila Field Sayas. I'm also a member of Chango and hopefully going to be on the E-board next semester. But I have a question. So we talk about the difference between the systemic issues in Latin America and in the United States. And one of the things that I hope one of you guys could touch on was, en los Estados Unidos no tenemos este mestizaje, like we don't have like a system of white people are able to like distance themselves from their actual very real whiteness, and I feel like in the United States, no tenemos ese tipo de like you can choose to leave whiteness if it benefits you. So how do you, what are your thoughts about that, and like the difference between how race works as a system and how we can talk about that in a way that's uplifting and empowering for us?
I was thinking, I always say, it's all the Americas, right? So everybody's all mixed up, right? Like, and in the United States, they have a system that says 1 drop of black blood makes you black. And in Latin America, they say, we're all got mixed blood, so we're all the same. But I think we need to talk about the economic power structures as a way to understand why that difference matters. So I think a lot of the conversation today has been about how there's a denial in the Latino community that that racism exists, right? Because it can't be so bad for you because we're all a little bit black, right? And I'm doing fine. So I think we need to call out those differences. I think that people understand how mestizaje is still racism. I think they do, right? But I think that the people who are privileged and by skin color or by money, right? Because that's another division. They're going to deny that there's a unique experience of being black. But that happens in America too. Yeah, I mean, people deny. How many times do people say, "Oh, it's not so bad," right? It can't be that bad because I've not experienced that. So one way is to represent your own experiences. I use the art for that. But another way is to call people out about the fact that no, there's a big difference between your lived experience, your economic ability, your economic access, and that can actually be done statistically. I mean, there's data.
Roland?
Yeah, I think that the young people with their ability to access technology can help us answer that question, meaning that there is some sort of universality with the level of oppression that exists of our folk, regardless of the zip code. So if you begin to project data that shows that we don't have access to economic development, we don't have access to health, sometimes we don't have access to water, to energy, etc., that in itself shows that there is a serious pattern of racism against our folk. So we don't need to become too sophisticated in designing language. Data will be our best proof to see or determine the condition in which we find ourselves throughout the Americas, including Europe.
Ditto, to be honest. On top of your points of data, not only understanding the data, but now what do we do with that? And having groups of people who are advocating for our betterment, our progression in these Latin American countries, in these small communities within these countries, because it's so important that we continue to uplift and advocate and do it with solid evidence, solid data that supports the concerns that we're expressing.
Yeah, I think, the whole notion of mestizaje is part of that myth making, right? Like I think, to Anita's point, right? It's like, there's racial harmony because we're all sort of mixed, right? We all have African, blood. And we know, I think that, Roland hit the nail on the head, right? Like, data disproves that, right? If you look at what happened after Hurricane Maria, right? It took almost a year for, all power to go back to Puerto Rico. And when you look at the communities that got electricity last, those black descendant, Afro-descendant communities, right? It's very clear. The data lets you know that, right? Across the board. We know that to be true. And so I think data is a good way of disarming that argument.
But there's also the semantics. Brazil, racial democracy. Mexico, la raza cósmica. So we manipulate language in order to advance our racist agenda. We need to be very cognizant of that semantical manipulation in order to avoid falling into traps. And we need to be very forceful in telling folk, hey, that is not going to fly. But you also need to become competent in understanding your own Afro-Latino history. The school is not going to teach it, so parents and the rest of you have a responsibility of reading. You need to become competent. It's not just about singing, dancing, and jugando pelota. It's more than that. Okay. And dominoes.
Buenas noches. Yo soy una educadora y también una madre. Entonces, para piggyback en lo que dijo ahorita Roland, hace un ratico hablábamos de que sí, hay como un movimiento que intenta borrar esa historia que estaba enseñada en un momento, pero ahora hay muchas intenciones de tratar de dejarla por fuera de las escuelas. Yo estoy viendo eso ahorita mismo en DC. Entonces, ¿qué recomendarían ustedes a los educadores para que tratemos de guiar a las generaciones que están creciendo y tratarlas como de educar en ese sentido? Porque a veces encuentro ese pushback, no solamente de la gente afroamericana, que ellos sí empujan para atrás cuando los afrolatinos tratamos de hacer algo, pero también de los complacent afrolatinos, que están very eager como a, no, sí, eso no pasó, no, sí, no hablemos de la parte mala, no, sí, eso todo está bien, nosotros estamos bien, aquí no está pasando nada. Entonces, sí, si pudieran ilustrarnos un poquito.
Okay. La contestación es la siguiente. Yo creo que nuestros padres tienen que ser más militantes en defender sus intereses y involucrarse en aquellos asuntos escolares. Y es que caemos en lo que yo llamo una Disneylandia irracional. Porque estamos en los Estados Unidos, creemos que estamos en Disneylandia. No. Eso diluye nuestra intensidad de defender nuestros derechos. Y por eso es que yo abogo más por la militancia. Y esa militancia se manifiesta en el trabajo, se manifiesta en nuestros sistemas escolares y otras áreas donde nosotros tenemos que defender nuestros intereses colectivos y no caer en trampas de vagancia.
No, realmente nos falta mucho trabajo que hacer, realmente en todo sentido. La falta de representación en nuestra comunidad es algo que ni te lo puedo explicar porque es horrible. Para darte ejemplo, en la ciudad de Nueva York, hemos intentado los últimos 10 años de crear un currículo enfocado en la experiencia de la comunidad afroamericana, la experiencia de la comunidad latina y la experiencia de otras comunidades. Hoy en día han aprobado para la comunidad afroamericana, que nosotros apoyamos el 1000%, pero todavía no apoyan el currículo para la comunidad latina. Entonces que nosotros como comunidad en general nos falta mucho que hacer, no solamente en términos de qué estamos haciendo en casa, pero qué estamos haciendo en espacios públicos, qué estamos haciendo en el gobierno, qué estamos haciendo en el sector sin fines de lucros, etcétera, etcétera, etcétera.
Buenas noches.
Yeah, so I will say quickly that representation is sorely lacking across the board when we talk about the Latina experience, right? So I was mentioning that in the City Council in New York City, we've been fighting for the past decade to create curriculum specific to different communities, the African American community, the Latino community, and other communities. We have approved the African American curriculum, which we 100% support. We've been backing and supporting it, but they have yet to support a Latina curriculum, right? Even though 45% of the student population in New York City is of Latino origin, right? So we have so much work to do in all spaces, right? When it comes to government, when it comes to public spaces, and what we have to do at home as well too. So it's across the board, and we are way behind in terms of really sort of driving change.
She was asking about how Latine people are also denying the experiences of racism that individuals have when they raise them.
Well, and I think that's why this curriculum is so critically important, right? Because it is about centering blackness within that experience.
I'll give you a brief example. When a couple of years back, when I returned to Puerto Rico, I was saying that I identify myself as Afro-Puerto Rican. This is the answer that they gave me. Ah, no, tú estás mezclado con esos negros americanos y ahora tú estás diciendo que tú eres afroamericano. Brother, yo te veo a ti como boricua, así que déjate de chavienda. Meaning that when I returned to Puerto Rico and I was identifying myself as Afro-Puerto Rican, my peers and friends were saying, no. You are embracing an Afro-American agenda, and we do not see you as that. We see you as Boricua, which in a way impacts upon your awareness, your identity, your definition, but it also centers on the issue of educación, you know? So, but I also repeat that we cannot fall into the trap and say that all white Hispanics are racist. You cannot fall into that because it will sabotage your intention of forming coalitions. But those that exercise that racism, you need to shame them publicly y meterle un cantazo.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. Hola, Rolando. So my question, we live in DC. DC has historically been predominantly African American community. It has, obviously, because of economic gentrification and movement to Bowie in PG County, so the African American population has decreased. However, there was a comment earlier that you are Afro descendant, regardless if you're English speaking, Spanish speaking, or French speaking, that you still, what brings you together is that you're Afro descendant. However, having lived in DC for a very long time and having worked in the public sector for a very long time, and having worked in the community for a very long time, I find that the African American community is a little antagonistic to the Latino community, whether it is African descent or indigenous descent or Criollo descent. Because if what language is what you're sharing, then you would think that the African American community would not be antagonistic to African English speaking communities, and that is happening. So how do you then engage the African American community to teach them that you're not fighting for the meager resources, thank you, that you're actually as one pie, that there's enough for everybody, and then you're not trying to take away from them, that you're not trying to observe what they have, and you're not denying their historical background, because the African American descent, his history is not the same as the Latino or the Caribbean or even Haitian. It's not the same. You do share a racial background, but you're not sharing a culture or language background. So how do you come together with those differences?
I just think I have so many thoughts on that. Because my family's a fourth generation DC, right? Right, so my father met my mother, the Cubano met the African American church lady at Howard, right? So I want to say that there is like Washington DC people who are multi-generational, who migrated up here from the deep south or came here after 1619 and settled in. It's almost the same question you would ask indigenous Native American people, right? And how they feel about other people coming in. But it doesn't mean there's not a solidarity. It just means that there hasn't been an understanding about what the solidarity is. It goes back to what he's saying about educate, right? Oh, I just thought this woman There's this woman in England I work with. She created a podcast series called "Educate Your Damn Self." That's the name of it, right? But I mean, it takes that kind of maybe we should do a podcast that African Americans would listen to. I mean, that's what he's talking about, coalition building. What if there was a podcast where one week was about African American history and another week was about how long Latinos have been in Washington, D.C.? Because a lot of my research is about the ships that came up from the Caribbean to the Chesapeake Bay. And when you think about those ships, they had all kinds of people up there. The colonizers didn't recognize the diversity of the black people they were bringing in as slaves.
They didn't care.
And they didn't care. But I mean, I think if you could talk, if there was more educational programming that spoke to the people who have lived in Washington, D.C. a long time, about how people have been coming here for a long time, and that we are the same people, that might be the solution.
We also need to educate ourselves about Black history.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
Black American history.
We have an order to this.
It's not true
If
that
you
all
get the
Black people
mic.
are antagonistic to us. It's just not true. That hasn't been my experience, and I resent that implication.
Okay. Now, there is a bit of miseducation with respect to the history of Black Americans and how that is shared in Central and South America. Most news related to Afro-Americans when it hits Central and South America is very negative. Okay? Positive news related to blacks are seldom filtered in Central and South America. So that particular population, when it arrives in the United States, many times have a very distorted view of our folk here. Okay? And I encourage many of our Latino brothers and sisters to study the struggle of Afro-Americans here, because it is that struggle that allowed others to enjoy the benefits of this democracy. Okay? So, and Afro-Americans need to also understand the struggles of Latinos in Central and South America with respect to repression, colonialism, etc., because it all boils down to politics. The reason why we are intentionally divided is so we do not become a political bloc that can neutralize the folks that are manipulating us. So don't fall for the Disneylandia. Okay? So that's all.
Wait, I have a quick comment right before we get to the next question. I'm sorry. But in that regard, as well as understanding our histories and like all the struggles that we've gone through as Afro-Latinas, as African Americans, also understand our overlaps. Even though we struggled in different continents and different countries, our cultures still overlap as well. My mom is Puerto Rican and my dad's African American, so he's not Latino at all. But growing up in the household, experiencing both, I know that there's an overlap, and I know that our cultures have similarities, have similar struggles, have things that we can talk about and commune with, even though we are from different cultures, countries, languages. And to your point about podcasts, Shango has a podcast. It's called Radio Shango. Okay, it's on Spotify and YouTube, so you know, do that.
Hello everyone, my name is Amber Robles Gordon, and I'm a visual artist. And so there's a part of me that can't leave this room without talking about my own artwork, because in 2021 I had a solo exhibition called Successions Traversing U.S. Colonialism, and it featured 7 double-sided quilts that talked about the, thank you. it talked about the ill ways in which the U.S. government treats its citizens that reside in the territories and not mainland USA. And so my goal, so I did, on the front of the quilt, it dissected either the territorial seal or the flag, and on the back, I referenced their spiritual and cultural energy, right? And so my objective with this body of work was to engage a conversation around people of the greater majority. Because yes, this is an issue about people of Latino and African descent, but it's also a global issue in relationship to what you mentioned before about white supremacy. This is about colonialism. This is about imperialism. This doesn't happen only to citizens and people that are only in the United States. This is about people. This is about anti-color, anti-racism. This is about white supremacy. I just saw the news in Canada. Jamaican farm workers are being treated ridiculously. It is not, and they specifically said this isn't just about the Jamaicans are the same people that are working that are have white skin, same job, but they're not being treated the same way. The Jamaicans are the ones that are being. Okay, so I've gone way, way off. But my point is, this isn't just about our particular grouping of people, and I'm not negating that we still need to have these conversations. I'm saying that we have to look at it from above. This is about people of color, period, and how we are treated in our world. So that's, I couldn't leave this space without, talking about that body of work. But also, how do we connect? All of the things that we do, and I'm a Howard alumni. I graduated in 2011, so I can't leave the space without saying that too. But we need to find ways to further have these connections, these spaces where we can find each other. And not only when we are in spaces such as this, but I'm really glad for this space. But anyway, that's what I'd like to say.
Hi, I came, we drove all the way from the Bronx to come down here and to come surprise Angela. But I wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for even having this, because I know that we didn't have spaces like this before, the affirmation and the conversations and things like that. But my question is, there is hope for the younger generations, because we're having these conversations now, because we're calling people to the mat, things to the mat. But I know for me, for the longest time, I didn't like the term, and I'm still not comfortable with the term Afro-Latina, because it was a distinction. Like the Latinos, the real Latinos are café con leche with the curly hair, and they look like the stereotypical post, like West Side Story. West Side Story are the real Latinos. And if you're any darker, if you're lighter than that, we got you, we accept you. But if you're darker than that, then you're just an Afro-Latino. And there is that underlying the sense of less self-worth when anything darker. So my question is, not just for the younger generations, because I feel like there is hope, but for the older generations, how do we realistically go about divorcing the shame that's associated with that word? Does that make sense? Like, to be Afro-Latina, there isn't that sense of pride, because even in the generations like mine and older, it's like, pero yo no soy negra. Pero yo no soy negra, pero yo tengo pelo bueno. Pero like, it's all these distinctions, like, well, you gotta be black. Well, how come I can't just be Puerto Rican? Why do I have to be Afro-Latina? How come I can't just be, because when I look at Latinos, we're anywhere from clear to midnight and everything in between, and that is an authentic Latino person. Like, you never know what you're gonna get, because it's mixing the colors. How do we realistically, besides having conversations where it's just us showing up to have them, how do we go about actively dismantling and divorcing the shame that's associated with in the older generations with blackness and Latinidad. I think a lot of times I think we don't speak to that, and maybe that's just my experience coming from New York and living in Pennsylvania and things like that. Like, this is a lot more open-minded space, but outside of this super phenomenal bubble, how do we go about addressing and divorcing that distinction? And it's like, I can't be Afro-Latina because there's so much shame in the darkness. There's so much heaviness. How do we do that, if that's even something we can discuss?
Porque negro no es malo. Todo lo que es negro no es malo. Punto final. Todo lo que es negro no es malo. And you gotta stand in that. And you gotta stand in that. And you gotta stand in that. Because that is the truth. I'm so sorry. They gave me the mic. It was on. I answered. I'm sorry. But you have to stand in that. Porque todo lo que es negro no es malo. And I will not associate my blackness with anything that is negative. I will not associate my blackness with weakness. I will not associate my blackness with exclusion. I will not associate my blackness with anything that is less than. Because what people are we that we have survived generations and still live to say, aquí estamos, and you can't kill us. You gotta stand on that. Soy negra. And I don't have a problem with saying Afro-Latino, but I stand firm in saying que soy negra. Because I am a black woman everywhere. I am a black woman in Limon, Costa Rica. I am a black woman in Brooklyn. I am a black woman. Anywhere I go, I'm a black woman. So there is no distinction, beloved, between the African Americans and the Afro-Latinos. Because blackness, baby, is never confused.
Hey, how's it going? I had a question. Sorry, I hate to back that one up. That was beautiful, by the way. That was beautiful. My name is Walter Tusronada. My father is Indigenous American, Crow tribe. My mother is black, if you will. And I wanted to touch base on what you were saying as far as a community, as black, we seem to separate ourselves just because of this group speaks a different, or it doesn't affect us because we're living in a certain community right now that we don't see as different from what's happening in Latin communities for Afro-Latinos, or, you know, and the other. But what I would like to ask is, what does the organization look like to you on moving forward to be able to separate those borders between the black communities across the world and to move forward with being able to attack this imperialism that seems to be really just winning at this point? I wouldn't say winning all the way, but they've done such a great job at being able to hide who the enemy is that we're pretty much like pointing the finger at everybody else, like, oh, you're leftist, you're rightist, or this, that, you don't listen to this music, but like, what does that organization look like moving forward as a black community?
I mean, it's not that difficult. We spent a lot of time just now talking about divisions about each other, like African Americans and the white Latinos and the black Latine. And I think that the answer to coalition building is to have people from each coalition. You have to get a leader in each coalition to speak to their own coalition in their own languages, and then try to create forums where they can come together to have the conversation. And the conversation can't be the end of it, right? Because that's the other thing, we're having a conversation today. But it would have to do with what is the next steps. What is the political action that we can do on campus? What is the cultural events that we can do together to gather more people behind the issue that we want to? And it also has to do with defining the issue. Like, are we talking about, I mean, racism is a really big topic, and it affects everybody, all races, right? So what is it that we actually want to achieve with the coalition? Because the coalition isn't going to stay together forever, right? It's going to come together for a particular purpose at a particular time. I think that what he said is so true. Now is the time. I mean, it seems like one of the common threads today is education. And in the room, there are people who are actually doing things to advance educating people about Afro-Latine identities and politics and histories. Can those people stand up? So coalition, thank you. So coalition building is talking to those people about what their strategies are and seeing if you can implement those strategies in your own community. That's like one simple thought.
Just one word of caution. Whenever you are planning coalitions, there's going to always be an infiltrator that is going to deviate the agenda and try to sabotage. So you need to be very cognizant of those intentions and neutralize that individual with force. I'm not saying to exterminate. I'm just saying verbally neutralize a person that has other intention. Gracias.
Yeah, and just we have institutions, right? We have to build through the institutions that we have, and understanding that we need to break bread, right? And these are not going to be easy conversations or simple ones, by the way. As you've heard, some of the questions, right, or statements that have made right here, right, with people of good intention, right, like people that want to reach out, but may not have the language, right, and may not have the understanding in order to do that effectively. We have to help those people and not shout them down, because the miseducation has been systemic, right? Has been historical. And so I think all of us, right, and I've talked to Marta quite a bit, where she's like, okay, don't say that, right? Don't say that word, right? You know, and again, and we all need to sort of have that constant state of learning, right? And educating ourselves and educating others in order for us to get to a better place. So I think we are, unfortunately, having to end this conversation now. I do want you to give a huge round of applause for these amazing panelists. Amazing. Let's continue these conversations. Let's continue to act, right? It's like everything's at stake right now, and we have to center our experience in order to save this country, or save the Americans, let me just say. So, gracias. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Gracias. Let's give a round of applause to the panelists. To all of you for this wonderful and lively conversation. And I just wanted to say that my name is Josue Perea. I serve as the Executive Director for the Afro-Latino Forum, which is a nonprofit that focuses on centering Blackness within Latinidad. And we envision a world where Black Latinidad is affirmed and the contributions of the African diaspora are always centered in the world. And I say that because in order for our conversations to continue to move, we need to move beyond recognition, beyond simply claiming identity, beyond asking for belonging, and really to demanding what we're talking about here, which is centering and working together. We have learned from many of our African American, African colleagues throughout the world on what we need to do. We have worked with Afro-Latinos throughout this country. There was a conversation said about coalition. That's actually how Dr. Marta and I were working together, building an Afro-Latino coalition in this country to combat its erasure for Blackness that occurs a lot in Latino spaces. We heard a conversation about curriculum, and some of the work that we've done is to build curriculum to center Afro-Latino stories by working with different schools, school places in New York City and in other cities. So their work is happening. The work is happening. You just sometimes are not aware that it's happening and where it's happening. And we do that by working together, and we need to work together. We center Blackness by working together for Black liberation, because ultimately this is a fight for Black liberation. This is a fight for immigration and Black immigration. This is a fight for reproductive justice. This is a fight for trans liberation, and all the intersections that we cohabitate as Afro-Latinx. We're not single issue people. We live in an intersection. Frantz Fanon said that the lived experience of the Black person is how we see Blackness in the world, through the lived experience of the Black person. And Audre Lorde reminds us that we have to define ourselves by ourselves. We can't have others define us. And why is that important? Because, as Audre Lorde says, ours were crushed by those definitions. And we're more when we define ourselves by ourselves. So that's why we named this series Absolutamente Negro, Absolutely Black, to affirm and center our Blackness, to affirm and center this conversation around the need for a radical and revolutionary Blackness that talks about unity and fights for Black liberation in this city, in this country, and throughout the world. So thank you all for coming to this initial conversation. Like I said, there will be further conversations that we're going to have. The series begun in October. We had a wonderful panel. We had a panel just a few weeks ago that focused on Afro-Latinas' lived experiences and realities. We have another conversation happening in LA, specifically talking about racism and colorism in Latinidad. So these conversations are happening, and what we ask is that you continue to follow the work that we're doing. And now, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Marta Moreno Vega, who's also going to give a note of gratitude. Doctora.
I wonder, when I was listening to the questions, do you know who Schomburg is? Do you know who the Honorable Marcus Garvey is? Absolutely. So then if you absolutely know, the questions should not have been asked the way they were asked. Because it means that you're looking for someone else to save you. And no one else is going to save you, especially your oppressor. So that if you give your power to the oppressor, then you deserve to be oppressed. So let's be very clear. These conversations are not to honor the oppressor. So then the questions have to be more informed. Because Jose was talking about Yoruba Guman, but before him, there were others. There was Captain Dunham, Zora Neale Hurston, Sylvia de Villar. We could go on and talk about people who were doing this work. This work is not new. And don't talk about it like if it's new. Come on. Because when you ask questions like, why are we still hating Blackness? We know why. You only change it when you change it. When you change your mind and you change your narrative and you act upon it. So, they ain't no feeling sorry. More than, how many people were forcibly taken out of Africa and brought into the Americas to work for free? And you're looking for who to save you? Enslavement was just a couple of years ago. 1888, Brazil. 1873, Puerto Rico. And we could go on and on. It was yesterday. Your freedom is you. And if you don't understand it's you, then we will continue to be enslaved of mind and body. So that it's on us. And when Josue and I agreed, and CJI and the forum agreed to come together, is because we're working in coalition. In respect for each other in terms of what has been built. But we're not building new. We're the continuum. And if we don't see ourselves as the continuum, that were lost. So welcome to the continuum.
Digo, porque soy Latin-Americana from the line, and I spits that commitment when I mean to that Jamaican rhyme. And don't get it twisted, cause I am that Brooklyn bombshell. Step back because my actions you can never tell. Soy Afro-Caribbean Latina, multifaceted, multicultural beaver. And I can run the streets and what's up beat to everything blessed. Y de ahí, pura de ahí. Arroz con todo. Cook up rice is what them call me. And that's okay. Porque soy un poquito. Just a little bit of everything. Soy la negra speaks. When I was growing up in Brooklyn, I wrote that poem when I was 19. I discovered Daughters of the Diaspora, a book on Afro-Hispanic writers. And in that book, Tia, you will recognize this poem, Rotundamente Negra, by Shirley Campbell Barr. And then she led me to Eulalia Bernard. If you don't know who she is Limon Costa Rica's Toni Morrison. She is like Louise Bennett from Jamaica. She is so wonderful. And she died. And her name was not called. And so my work went from La Negra Tiene Tumbao to La Negra Speaks. Because what if La Negra spoke about rencor y odio? What if she talked about not welcoming you into her space? What if she talked about the fact that she was more than hips and dips, that she was more than salsa, that she was not just fuckable, but that she was a woman with a voice? What if La Negra spoke? And so I spoke. A 19-year-old girl from Brooklyn, fat, black, not shaped properly, with English surnames. How dare I claim Latinidad? You must not know about me. I claim Latinidad because in 1948, that was the first time Costa Rica desegregated and allowed Afro descendants to leave Limon, Costa Rica. My mama was born in 1948. That was yesterday. So I am not concerned any longer about ni de aquí, ni de allá. It is a necessary conversation, but it is one that I have taught in my high school classroom. Brittany, where you at, baby? See, because I don't talk about this. This is work that I have done. The proof is in the pudding. I raised that baby. And that baby sat in my classroom and told a group of majority Salvadoran students that were non-black, I am here and you cannot forget me. The proof is in the work. So, if you are here to stroke your ego tonight, if you are here to feel good about saying words, then I don't know you, because I'm in the trenches. And so ni de aquí ni de allá is not my conversation. My conversation is, yo no soy afro-conveniente. I am not afro-convenient. I am not just afro because it is okay for me to now don an afro and get a position. No, I am a black woman. And my work is in the crossings. My work, baby, my work is this new thing that we have created. Behold, before I crossed eternity into life, they passaged through oceans and memories. They lived on the shores of West Africa and died under the palm trees of Jamaica. They crossed into new life and ate the bitterness of sorrow. My mothers refused death for my birth. My father subdued pride for my survival. I ate truth and became their griot, one trained to retell the origin of a people. I live so that I might journey into past, quicken present, and rewrite futures. Before I crossed eternity into life, they passaged through oceans and memories, from the palm trees of Jamaica to the railroads of Limon, Costa Rica. They crossed into new life and ate the hope of beginnings. They altered their patterns of phonetic rhythms to speak 3 tongues. My grandmothers, they cooked Africa in Spanish languages. My grandfathers built railroad tracks and spoke Jamaica in verse. I suckled freedom and became their poet, one trained to prophesy to cultures. I live so that I might journey between languages, tell true stories, and reveal a fabricated history. Before I crossed eternity into life, they passaged through oceans and memories, from the Caribbean coast of Limon, Costa Rica, to the Caribbean concrete of Flatbush, Brooklyn, blah, 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 blah. They crossed into new life and savored the spices of new nations. My aunts laundered clothes in ceramic tubs and line dried in the cold of winter. My uncles labored in hotels and spoke accented Spanish with Limonense Creole. I chased identity and became their inquisitor, one trained to find certainty. I live so I might cross continents and countries. I live so that I might cross continents and countries, find my diaspora, and be free. Mami, pásame una botella de agua, por favor. That one right there. I know I didn't ask permission, but it must be done. Thank you, Tony. Gracias, mi amor. Tonight I stand.
Yes.
Yes. When we talk of divinity, I stand in the power of my cloud of witnesses. Yes. I stand in the power of my ancestors. It is my uncle Ernell Gibbs Slowly, so I have to call his name. It is my uncle Ernell Gibbs Slowly. He is the one who told me when my father rejected me, you was my niece. You was a fucking Gibb. And he gave me the ability to say, soy de Limón, Costa Rica, de Baquetraque, la línea real por las cruces. I'm from Crossing. Ask about me. So I call his name, Ernell Gibbs Slowly. He was a football player for Limón, Costa Rica. He was excellent. And I call his name. And I call the name of my sister, Dr. Tatiana K. Benjamin, who passed away at 34 years old because the state killed her, having undocumented parents. The only person who could take care of her family, and she did it and fulfilled. I live so that their names and their work does not die. Because Dr. Tatiana Benjamin talked about the partnership and coalition of black women. In Trinidad, we call it susus. In Jamaica, we call it partners. In Brooklyn, we called it my mama found money to get me Christmas presents. So I call them by name. When you ask me about the divinity of God, please do not believe that I have not wrestled with spirit. Do not believe that I have not asked, but I have been answered. And so tonight I share with you my answer. It is not complete. It is not going to fill everyone's cup, but it is the answer that was given to me. This is titled Speaking in Other Tongues. I asked God if he understood us in other languages. When our tongues stopped dancing with the drum beats of our nations, Did he still remember our names? I wondered if he preferred our libations in specific languages. Did he understand the mourning of being forced to love him differently? Did he know the awkwardness of forming words unfamiliar to our mouths, forming sounds foreign to our ears? Did he understand the pain of our transatlantic translation? I asked him how the same verses in English that spoke of righteousness, say justicia, justice in Spanish, and were they the same? I asked if my people were always destined to speak and not be understood in tongues different from their own. I question, would we ever recognize our own speech patterns again? I asked God, what had we done wrong? Where had we constructed graven images? Where were our idolatries? What had we done so terrible for our words to always be manipulated according to the schemes of others? I asked God if he understood us in other languages. When our tongues stopped dancing to the drum beats of Africa, did he still remember our names? I wondered if he preferred our libations in specific languages. Did he understand the mourning of being forced to love him differently? Did he know the awkwardness of forming words unfamiliar to our mouths? I asked God, and he answered me. She answered me. They answered me. I understand you en todos sus idiomas. I know your voice everywhere. Amen.